Design is supposed to be creative work, but for a lot of us, our jobs have turned into something out of the Hunger Games, where we're competing for headcounts or we're fighting for relevance and we're hoping to make it until the next round of layoffs. And endurance gets rewarded by our corporate overlords, and our creativity slowly drains, and then suddenly we're left going through the motions, wondering what the hell happened. If that experience feels familiar, then stick around because today we're going to talk about how designers can reclaim their creativity, take back their agency, and realize that we have more choices than we might recognize. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome. I am super stoked to have you. You ever ship a feature that should have never seen the light of day, or survive a sprint planning where nothing got planned? Or maybe you just said, let's circle back under your breath for the 50th time this week. Well, you, my friend, have earned a merit-ish badge. Grab your set of Beyond UX Design merit badges, a vintage-inspired sticker series for UX designers, PMs, researchers, engineers who have seen things. Choose from 4 sets: Soft Skill, Sharp Tongue, the Cult of Figma Initiation, Pixel Pusher Survivor Kit, and the brand new research-inspired set Field Notes and Frayed Nerves, and even more to come soon, so stay tuned. Each set of 5 badges celebrates the chaos, the coping, and the conference calls that should have been DMs. Stick them on your laptop, flaunt them at your stand-up, show the world you made it out of Q4 with your sanity mostly intact. Get 1 set of 5 stickers for $12 or 2 sets for $20 at beyonduxdesign.com/badges. Just promise me one thing: send pics and show me where you stick them. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, Tino, Adina, and Zoe for all the support. And if you want to join these fine folks and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you'll get exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. Get instant access to those videos right now for as little as $5 a month. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then for the love of God, tell your mom and them. So what happened to design? Vivian, I don't know. Something happened over the last 15 or 20 years. And I don't know about you guys, but my job today, it feels very, very different from the job that I had 10 years ago. It seems like, to me at least, the system starts to reward people for shipping faster and faster and faster. And AI has not helped at all. It feels like it rewards all the yes people, the yes men. I feel like, I don't know, a lot of us, we feel like we've lost our creativity, we lost our agency, and then what happens? We feel stuck going through the motions, counting down the days until we retire at best, or we're just desperate to quit, and we can't because we don't have any other opportunities. But is that true? We might just have more options than we think, and I am so excited to have Vivianne Castillo on the show today because we're going to talk all about that, and she's going to shed some light on maybe you've got more options than you think. Vivianne Castillo is the founder of Humanity-Centered and Choose Courage, Inc., where she partners with entrepreneurs and organizations to build brave, people-first businesses rooted in clarity, care, and conviction. A Fast Company award-winning creative, Vivian brings over a decade of experience in psychology, human services, and research across industries and cultures, and her work has been featured in Slate, Fortune, Fast Company, and Elle. Whether she's guiding executives through trauma-informed leadership or coaching founders through values-driven growth, Vivian is known for blending strategy with soul. And at the heart of it all is one core commitment: to choose courage over comfort, always. Vivian, I am so excited to finally have you on Beyond UX Design. How is it going? How are you?
Yo, it's good. It's good. And I'm so excited to be here with you. I've been looking forward to our session. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
Of course. All right. So I think everybody, I don't know, maybe everybody, maybe everybody's a strong word. I don't know. I have been following you for a long time online, and I feel like you are a voice in true human-centered design. There's a lot of fakers, I feel like, out there, and you have been one of the voices that have been very vocal, I think, in promoting a true human-centered approach. And so I'm really excited to kind of have you on, which is interesting about this. And this is where I want to kind of talk. You left UX design not long ago, and you left for an interesting reason. And you started realizing some of these things. I think I'm really excited to hear your perspective and what you're doing. And maybe we'll get into this at some point, but some takeaways, see how maybe people can follow your path and find their true purpose in life. It's not serving our corporate overlords. I don't think you would say that. So anyway, welcome to Beyond UX. So I know I read that bio a little bit, but yeah, tell us a little bit about you, and ultimately, how did you get on this path where you started to kind of choose your own agency and say, I'm taking it back?
Yeah, I hope people after this episode realize that they don't have to help their billionaire boss go to space. Again, there's other paths forward. But I'm Vivianne Castillo, and I'm a diehard Chicagoan. I actually currently live in Querétaro, which is a few hours outside of Mexico City. So I'm here with my bilingual Doberman pup who knows all of his commands in Spanish as well. My background's a little weird. I have a background in counseling and human services, specifically trauma and addiction counseling. And some people also don't know this, but I also have a master's in theological studies, specifically around the theology of suffering. Because oftentimes when I was working with people who were experiencing trauma or addiction or shame or hardship, the question of God and deeper spiritual things always came up. So I have that background. I made a career switch into the UX and tech industry around 2015, 2016. Who knows? Time means nothing these days. Was able to get my start in the industry. And I remember when I first joined the industry, I was like many of folks who are probably listening to this call, really drawn in by the ideals around being human-centered and inclusive and caring about people. And one of my very first design conference experiences was the O'Reilly Design Conference. And I remember going there and I was super excited. These, heads of design from Uber and Google and these big companies. And after the experience, I remember sitting on my hotel bed and being like, wow, this is bullshit. Like, we just have very different understandings of what does it actually mean to be deeply, thoughtfully, and intentionally human centered. And that has really been kind of like the catalyst of my career. For me, I've always been really passionate about the practice as well as the practitioner. What does it mean to be trauma informed? What does it mean to understand the role of shame in research and design? And that has always been my heart within the industry. And so I was able to be in the industry, do a lot of good work, have a lot of great conversations, so on and so forth. But, I always knew my time in UX would have like an end date. I didn't know when. But I realized that as I was in the UX industry, there was this cost and kind of like chipping away at my spirit that was happening. Because of the topics I talk about, I also get a lot of things in my DMs. I get a lot of inappropriate, hateful, harmful responses. And years of that building up, years of seeing a lot of well-known UX leaders in our industry who have very little competence in what does it mean to be inclusive and actually ethically, holistically human-centered were being elevated, their work was being expanded. And I was like, I just feel like this industry isn't actually about people. Like, I don't think this is it. And kind of like the turning point for me was there was a year where I was going to a lot of different entrepreneurial conferences and experiences. And I remember coming back from one of them. I'd already been building humanity centered for a few years at this point. And I was talking to a good friend of mine and I was like, you know what? I don't ever want to go to another UX conference ever again. And he was like, that's aggressive. What makes you say that? And I was like, I'm going to these entrepreneurial conferences and experiences, and the people there, they're so generous in what they're sharing with me. They're curious. They're being creative as they're helping me solve these problems. And they're just operating from this place and understanding that there's enough abundance, there's enough for all of us at the table. And so they're just so creative and thoughtful. I was like, the UX industry, everything opposite of that. A lot of hoarding and fear and scarcity, chasing relevancy over maturity. People are white knuckling kind of things and they're not as generous as sharing and helping each other. And it just was lacking the sense of creativity and connection to people that I was finding and experiencing elsewhere. And so at the end of 2024, I decided to publicly leave the UX industry. Just tired of it, wasn't serving me. And I was feeling way more excited about the work that I was doing with Humanity Centered at the time, feeling way more excited with the coaching consulting work I'm doing with entrepreneurs, and was having fun being creative and thinking outside the box, like building an astrology for pets app. Like, why not? And I was just experiencing joy again. And I realized that I could experience that if I removed things that were taking from it. And UX was one of those things for me.
Wow, I love that. So I'm curious, before this is not necessarily related to the topic, but this is like really interesting observation that you made with regards to how, the entrepreneur community treats each other versus the UX community. And I have a thought in my head, but I'm curious, do you have a hypothesis on why that is? Like, why do you feel like the UX community is so cutthroat at some of these conferences? And like you said, like kind of everybody's kind of finding that last little scrap versus entrepreneur, where I would imagine, like an entrepreneur, it seems counterintuitive to me because like an entrepreneur, I could see them fighting for that VC, that capital, that, limited resources that like, only someone's got $1 million and I'm going to get it. And if I get it or you get it, I don't. So I'm curious, do you have a thought there? Like why do you think that is? I'm curious.
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah. I feel like there's a couple reasons for it. I think that part of it is just the way that UX was kind of brought up into corporate was this constant focus on relevancy. When you're thinking about relevancy within a corporate context, you have to think about you. You're not necessarily as communal as we may preach. And I think that's why I talk to a lot of UX folks these days who have experienced a lot of harm in the industry because this is an industry that prides itself on being human-centered, having values, caring about people. And yet this is the industry where I've experienced the most racism, the most sexism, and the most harm from leaders who publicly identify as being human-centered in all these things. And so I think there's a part of, a lot of UX folks complain about capitalism, but one, UX exists for the whole purpose of capitalism. And two, I think a lot of UX professionals don't realize how much they've internalized capitalism. And so it just creates this weird toxic culture of we say we care about people, but we're really about me, myself, and I.
So that's exactly where I was kind of going with this too, because the highest paying UX jobs are in tech. Tech companies are there to exploit your data, sell it usually. And, it's 100% capitalist. And, we don't have to get into debate or like capitalism versus communism, socialism, things like that. But I think we could make the objective statement that designers are taught, this human-centered approach. They're taught this, user-first approach. And when they get a job at a software company, it is the opposite. It is essentially a lot of times, like creating value for the stakeholders versus creating value for the users. And there's this sort of cognitive dissonance, I feel like a lot of times we're sort of feeling a certain way. And then, the highest paid tech jobs, they are so stressful. I've talked to people, for instance, that worked at places like Twitter back in the day before Elon Musk took over. And it was, say what you will about Elon Musk, but it wasn't any better before, like stressed out to the point of tears. TikTok wasn't any better. Obviously, they're maybe even more concerned about profits over users. I think you can make an objective statement there. They don't give a shit about kids and stuff. And, so you're fighting for these high-paying tech jobs, and you've got nobody cares about your philosophy on user first and things like that, and they want you to deliver, and so people get burnt out. And something interesting, like I've seen a lot of people, is to pivot to "quote unquote" influencers. Like I don't want to make any money with these high stress tech jobs, so now I'm going to become an influencer. And I'm going to start like posting all the time and doing conferences. And so I feel that's kind of like where I don't know, but it all kind of ties back to that sentiment though, that like the grind has kind of really worn us down. And how do we break free from it?
Yeah. And I think too, like I hear a lot about like endurance and like resilience. And I think that within the design community and the design culture around it, there's a lot of confusion between endurance and like resilience. And I think that adds to kind of like the toxicity of what's happening. I think endurance gets confused with resilience in design culture because we reward output, not recovery, and then we call it maturity. So from my experience, design culture really loves the story of the designer who can handle it. The late pivots, the vague feedback, the impossible timelines, the emotional labor of translating everyone's feelings into something shippable. And the person who doesn't flinch, becomes kind of like the gold standard. And over time, we stop asking whether they're resilient and we start assuming that they are because the work keeps getting done. But endurance and resilience aren't the same thing. And, when I think about the difference, endurance is about tolerating harm for a long time, and resilience is about adapting without losing yourself, right? And so like design, especially in product and tech environments, often sits at the intersection of ambiguity, power dynamics, and speed. And when those systems are unhealthy, then endurance becomes the coping strategy. And because designers are trained to empathize, contextualize, and make trade-offs, they're especially good at absorbing dysfunction quietly. And now we're like seeing some of that, bubble to the surface. And so we confuse then resilience with professionalism. If you name what's not working, you're emotional. If you push back on scope, you're not collaborative enough. If you need recovery time, maybe you're not scrappy enough, right? So then designers learn, don't break, buffer instead. And then organizations benefit from that confusion. Like a designer who endures without complaint is cheaper than a system that's actually well designed. So resilience gets rebranded as stamina, and stamina gets measured by how little support you need while still delivering quality work. And then it's performance review time, and that's what you're kind of banking on. So, but I feel like true resilience in design would look very different. It would look like clear decision-making structures, so designers aren't holding invisible weight. It would look like timelines that include iteration and recovery. It would look like specific feedback and not necessarily feedback that's on personality, right?
Yeah, no, I want to ask you something too, because like I feel like there's a lot of people. This is something I think you would know, I guess, obviously with your background, but a lot of people get that the what's the syndrome where you start to relate to your captors. What is that called?
Stockholm syndrome.
Stockholm syndrome. Thank you. Yeah. So I feel like a lot of designers they've sort of gotten Stockholm syndrome, and you mentioned this, like we internalize capitalism and things like that, but we're sort of held captive to these patterns, but we don't realize it. And so one of the things that I want to maybe set this expectation front or talk about this up front before we start moving on is some people might be listening to this and be like, this is like some woke bullshit. Like, like I don't believe any of this stuff. This isn't true. But what would be some symptoms that you could identify, like objective symptoms that you could see that you could talk to somebody and be like, oh my God, I'm seeing that. I didn't realize that I was actually going through this. I thought I was perfectly fine. Like on their team, like things that they're witnessing their teams do, or the way they might handle things. Anything you could talk about?
Yeah. I feel like my mind kind of goes to this kind of default thinking to like, I just need to get through it. And this kind of becomes the plan, right? It shapes how we calendar, how you think about and relate to your own body, how you make decisions based on survival instead of the actual design of the experience that you want. And it shows up, I think, in small and almost like invisible ways. Like for me, it was showing up in ways like deferring rest until after the next milestone, which is always moving, right? The goalpost is always changing. So rest isn't really like coming, or kind of like shrinking my hopes and my ideas kind of like match my capacity. I noticed that I stopped advocating for better because I've learned that it costs more energy than it gives back. I'm always trying to like fight for change and fight for something that's different. And, eventually just being like, what's the point? And also, I think I became really good at coping, and I started to struggle to like dream and be creative and imagine something outside like the current situation. And I think the most dangerous part of this kind of like mindset is that it can still technically work. Projects ship, people praise you, you're seen as steady and dependable. But inside, you're not just falling apart, you're shrinking. And I feel like a lot of the folks I work with these days, they have shrunk themselves and have been shrinking over the years, that now they come to me and they're like, I'm just trying to reconnect back to myself in some way. I know that where I am now is not who I was or where I want to be. And so there's a lot of like healing and kind of like restoring work that needs to be done then.
Yeah. What I'm really interested in today too is like getting at how we get our agency back as designers. And it's interesting because a lot of these design teams, like my current job, for instance, like we report into product. Very few designers, or there's very few, executive level designers, right? Like everybody points to Brian Chesky in Airbnb as like the CEO, founder, designer, but that's such a rare instance where designers are in charge and actually make decisions. And I'm curious, like when you think about that, where do designers go now? And how do we start to think about taking some of that agency back? And, in your case, I think you said, fuck it, I'm out. But is that like, do you recommend that for everybody? Or do you think there's ways that some folks might be able to regain that agency within the framework of this? Or is the opposite true, where like these tech bros are so ingrained in leadership and everything else that like it might even be impossible. I hate to sound defeatist, but I'm curious where your
Sure.
head's at.
Yeah. I think that designers can experiment with agency, but in order to do that, you need to start treating agency like a practice and not a personality trait. And definitely not in like an all or nothing kind of decision. So I feel like a lot of designers I talk to, they think about agency or they see agency as something that only kind of like shows up on the edges, quitting,
Hmm.
confronting, burning it down. But I feel like agency is actually built in small, kind of like low drama experiments that help you see where your power already exists. There's a couple ways like I think about this, and especially when I'm talking to folks. One is, how do I stop auto filling the gaps? I think one of the quickest, fastest ways to lose agency is to constantly compensate for what the system hasn't decided. So instead of fixing unclear strategy, it's try naming it, right? Before I move forward, I need clarity on A, B, and C. Or even asking yourself, what decision is this work meant to inform? Or who owns the final call here, right? It's not about pushback. It's more about design hygiene at this point. And I think it often reveals how much like invisible authority we've been carrying without consent. I'm a big fan of like boundaries. How do you practice a bounded yes? So agency for me isn't about saying no to everything. It's about choosing what your yes includes. So even things like, yeah, I can do this by Friday if we reduce scope, or I can take this on, but something else needs to come off, or I'm available for input, but I can't execute on A, B, and C, right? So it's not about withdrawing effort. It's more about how can I be more intentional in shaping the conditions in which I engage with something or help someone even within like my practice and within my design organization. The last one I'll mention is this. How do you then reclaim your curiosity? Because I think agency returns fastest through curiosity. So I'm often thinking about how can I ask questions not to please, but to understand. So this is like a practice of curiosity. What problem are we actually trying to solve right now? This is even in my personal life. This doesn't just have to be within the 9 to 5 walls of design, but the way that I think you start to reclaim agency in the work is also how you're practicing it outside. So the questions I'm thinking about often apply to both. What problem am I actually trying to solve right now? My personal life or my professional life? What would success look like beyond this particular understanding of this, particular dynamic or metric? And for me, I'm always thinking about how do I kind of like reposition myself from executor to thinker? Because a lot of the reason why people feel like they don't have agency anymore is because they don't have space or capacity to think. We have to give ourselves that and cultivate and protect that at all costs.
I love that. Yeah, because when you were talking about it originally, agency, often people think about it living on the extremes, like fuck you, I'm out. But like the first thing I thought of when you said that was like saying no to a meeting. Like I don't have to go to every single meeting. Am I getting something out of it, or are you getting value out of me being there? And if not, I don't need to go to that meeting. That's like a very simple thing. But the other thing I thought of was like that idea of yes and you framed it in a way. I've heard a lot of people push back on the idea of yes and is like saying yes to everything. But how did you frame it again? You said something very specific, and I hadn't heard it framed that way before. But it was no with the. How did you frame it?
Yeah. How do you practice a bounded yes?
A bounded yes. I love that. And I actually, to me, when you explained it, that was like when in my head I'm thinking like yes and, but I love a bounded yes because it's like yes with restrictions. It's like it's not a increased scope to the nth level yes. It's a yes, but we'll get this thing, or yes, we'll do this. And I love the way that you put that. And this is something I feel like is so important for us to think about, the little things, the little habit builders that you can gain your agency back and finding curiosity. I was thinking about before, and I wanted to kind of come back to this, but the idea, and this is something I feel like humans do this generally, it's not design specific, but this idea that like we're grinding and we're enduring, it reminds me a lot of like hazing almost in a way. Like I went through it, so I'm going to put you through it because you got to earn your stripes, and you don't belong here if you don't go through it too. Because it's not fair if you don't go through it because I went through it, And I'm curious if you got any thoughts about that, if you've ever thought about it that way. But this seems like a very human thing. I mean, it happens like, when we others, outsiders, to get them in our group, we've got to put them through these tests to make sure that they belong here and things like that. And I'm wondering if you've thought about that, like with your background in, psychology and stuff. Is that something like you've thought through? Like, does that apply here? And ultimately, my goal with that question is to think about how we can reframe it in a way.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that comes from this belief that if I want a good career, if I want, a good job, then it's going to require suffering. And I think that the idea that good careers require suffering comes from a few overlapping places. None of them are really neutral. I think the first one is a lot of that is inherited, right? Kind of like what you were saying. Hey, I've gone through this. You go through this. And a lot of our career mythology, maybe I'll call it, I think was if I'm doing like a super brief history lesson, was shaped a lot during industrialization when productivity mattered more than people. Long hours, physical exhaustion, and kind of like that emotional numbness weren't side effects, they were the point. And if your body was tired, then you were useful. If you were depleted, you were committed. And that logic never really left us. But just put on nicer clothes, gave us more technology, and put us into offices, startups, and passion-driven work, right? So I think like that's one part. Part of it's inherited. Part of it is this like moralized pain. Somewhere along the way, struggle kind of became a proxy for virtue. If it hurts, it must be meaningful. If you're tired, you must be important. If you're burning out, you must be doing something right. And we kind of turn suffering into proof of worth because it's easier to measure pain than purpose. And because systems often benefit when people don't question the cost, right? And another thing too, and I think we don't talk about this part enough, is that it's trauma dressed up as ambition. So like, I feel like a lot of high achieving cultures are built by people who survived chaos, scarcity, or instability. So for them, hard feels familiar and calm feels suspicious, right? Ease feels like a trap. So suffering then becomes normalized, even romanticized, because it matches the nervous system that they've learned to succeed inside of. But I think something that is hard to kind of sit with is this recognition that suffering is not a requirement for meaning. And some of this, again, is probably like, some of this probably goes back into folks in like their childhoods, depending on what you witnessed growing up. Difficulty can be part of growth, but chronic misery is usually a signal, not a badge of honor. And I feel like some of the most impactful work I've seen done by people who are well rested, emotionally regulated, and clear about their boundaries. Like they're not lazy, they're precise, right? They don't confuse urgency with importance, and they don't outsource their sense of worth to exhaustion. So practically, this kind of shows up in a few ways. This is when you stop asking, how much can I endure? And instead you start asking, what actually works when I'm resourced? This is when you start to design your career around seasons and not constant escalation. You start to notice, hey, this is just how it is actually code for this hasn't been questioned in decades. And you get very honest about whether your work is stretching you or slowly erasing you. And again, I don't want you to hear that I'm like anti-effort. It's more that I'm anti-needless suffering. There's a lot of suffering that we're already experiencing. And so why add needless suffering to the pile? A good career doesn't, and it should not require you to suffer. If anything, it requires us to be more awake. And when I say awake, I mean like awake people eventually realize that exhaustion is a terrible long-term strategy for impact, for creativity, and really for the life that you actually want to be in.
Even like physically. I mean, you like, it shortens your lifespan. Like it makes you physically ill if you don't rest and recover and actually get enough sleep every day because you're stressed out about work, this ties into the next thing I want to talk about perfectly, which was this idea that like a lot of our jobs, they reward the wrong behavior. And we mentioned this before, it could be just saying yes to everything. It could be responding to, Slack messages at 10 o'clock at night when you're trying to get your kids to bed or whatever, or 10 o'clock, that's really late. Someone with kids at 8 p.m., whatever. So I should know that. But, those kinds of things, it could be just saying yes to everything, being agreeable, like you mentioned before. We reward those patterns or our companies tend to reward those things. And so in order for us to get ahead in our careers while not doing those things, I feel like it needs to be reframed, and we have to reframe those things that we want as positives for the people above us. And so my question for you is, how do we start to reframe those better, more positive behaviors as success metrics for things like end of year reviews, right? When we are in line for promotions or whatever, and we do need to get those bonuses, the people that say yes, the people that respond to Slack messages, people that are agreeable, they're going to be the ones that often end up getting those promotions and raises. So how do we reframe that to get that agency back and a promotion and a raise and stuff? Is it possible?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think before I answer that, maybe let me start by naming some of the unhealed patterns that I feel like often show up as good employee behavior that often gets rewarded. And maybe like the uncomfortable truth first, which is that unhealed patterns are incredibly productive to your employer. Uncomfortable truth, but I'm just putting it out there. And that's why I think most workplaces, they don't just tolerate them, they reward them, right? Especially in design environments where that emotional intelligence, adaptability, and over responsibility look like excellence. So I see it when people pleasing becomes viewed as collaboration. So if you learned early on in life, in work, in your home growing up, that harmony kept you safe, then you'll be great at reading the room, anticipating reactions, and smoothing tension before it escalates. And at work, that looks like being easy to work with, but the cost is that your own needs, ideas, and limits rarely make it into the conversation. If you grew up with emotionally immature, unavailable parents, speaking from my own experience, it's really hard for folks like us to articulate what we need and want. We're very well aware of what's happening with other people and trying to make sure that everyone else is good. Another one that comes to mind is hypervigilance, then becomes viewed as attention to detail. So if you grew up needing to scan for shifts in mood or risk in your home growing up, you'll catch things others miss. People will be like, oh, you're so analytical, you're so aware. But it's actually more of a survival mechanism. You're often thinking 3 steps ahead. Also, this is like a subtle tell too. If you are eating in a restaurant and you need to sit in the chair where you can kind of see everything around you,
You're not having your back to the room. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
you are this
Yep.
person. And you'll often try to prevent those problems before they surface. And in corporate culture, that gets labeled as thoroughness and strategic thinking. And what doesn't get labeled is the constant internal alertness and kind of like onness of your nervous system that requires. Another one that comes to mind is over responsibility then becomes viewed as ownership. So if you learned that things fell apart unless you held them together, I'm talking to you, eldest daughters out there, you'll naturally take on more than your role. So kind of think a little bit about your upbringing here. If you were kind of like the glue in your family, you probably tended to fill gaps. But in work, right, you'll stay late, you'll fix what no one asked you to fix. And leaders love this until you burn out or stop volunteering to be the glue. I have 2 more for you. One is around self-silencing becomes professionalism. So if expressing emotion or disagreement once cost you connection, you'll know how to stay composed, measured, and objective in the workplace. You'll wait your turn, you'll soften your language, you'll choose restraint over honesty, you'll kind of walk on eggshells, you'll contort yourself a little bit. And that restraint gets praised as maturity, even when it prevents necessary conflict or truth telling. And the last one I'll put out there is one that we kind of teased out earlier is when endurance becomes viewed as resilience. So if you learn to survive by pushing through, you'll do the same at work, right? You'll tolerate misalignment, chronic stress, and unclear expectations without complaint. And you'll be admired for that grit, but what no one sees is how much of yourself it's costing in order for you to keep going. And the reason this is so sticky is because these patterns, quote unquote, work until they don't, right? They get you hired, trusted, and promoted, and then slowly they hollow you out. And so the shift isn't about rejecting competence or care, it's about updating the pattern. So unhealed behavior says, I am safe if I am useful. And that's a story that a lot of us tell in corporate. But healed behavior says, I am safe even when I have limits. So again, unhealed behavior says, I am safe if I am useful. Some of us, this plays out in work, romantic relationships, you name it. Healed behavior says, I am safe even when I have limits. And so a truly healthy workplace wouldn't just reward people for managing their wounds well. It would notice when great performance is being powered by self-abandonment, and then it would intervene. This is why it's really hard to find good managers, because they're also kind of working through their own unhealed wounds, and they're not able to catch moments like this and kind of nurture the kind of culture that's required for people to work well. And until then, I think like a lot of good employees will keep being applauded for patterns that once protected them, but now they quietly ask too much. Again, a lot of these patterns, they're survival things. They're not bad in and of themselves, but we're not kids anymore. And we don't have to endure some of these patterns and these behaviors. Like, we have more autonomy and more ways to change and heal. And so it's really about developing that awareness and acting accordingly.
So similar to how we took a yes and turned it into a bounded yes, is there a way to take some of those behaviors that are rewarded and turn them into some kind of, like, maybe flip them is the wrong analogy, but some kind of way to use those learned behaviors that are rewarded, but in a way that is more beneficial for us? Or not even, because I don't know that it's zero sum. Like, it doesn't have to necessarily be like I win, company loses, company wins, I lose. Is there a way to take those behaviors and add something to them so that it's beneficial for both, so that, my company does see value in it, but I also am not the one taken advantage of completely?
Is there a way to make this a win-win situation?
Right. Because I feel like a lot of us are stuck, especially right now. We feel stuck. I don't want to say we are stuck because that's too final, but we feel stuck. And, the job market, as we all know right now, maybe it's great for some people, but it's absolutely horrendous for others. It's either paycheck or nothing. And how do we get through it? I guess that's my big question. Is there a way to make it beneficial, mutually beneficial for everybody involved?
That's a good question. I think it's why, listen, this is a tough question. And my mind always goes to a conversation I had with my therapist years ago. And she was sharing with me about how a lot of us had just normalized being in toxic, abusive workplaces and situations. And then we're like, how do we make this work? And she was like, Viv, it would almost be like if you had a really close friend come to you and like, hey, I'm dating this guy, but he's always making me kind of question my worth, and he doesn't recognize just, my values. He's always making me second guess myself. And I feel like I'm having to walk on glass all the time. And, but I really want to try and make this work. Like, what do you recommend? I'm feeling more anxious. I'm not happy here. What do you recommend? We would be telling our friend, get the fuck out of it. No, you don't need to endure that. Go somewhere else, find someone else. There's better out there for you. But yet with work, we try to figure out a win-win situation with an abuser. And I'm not saying every place you go is going to be crap, but I do think if you are in a workplace where you are like, how do I improve my relationship with my abuser? Then it's time to start thinking about other options. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. And I think a lot of people turn off that thought because they're like, ooh, that's hard. But that's actually what capitalism wants you to think. And this is another signal of internalized capitalism. When you're actually reminded that you have choice, and capitalism, the internalization of it says, yeah, but it's not going to be easy. So it's not really an option.
Yeah. This is what I'm thinking about, right? This metaphor for getting out of a relationship, I think it works to a degree. Where it fails, I think, is we need a paycheck. We have to make money. We have bills to pay, generally speaking. And when I think about agency, a way to get your agency back, I think this is hard for a lot of people to hear. It's to not need the job in the first place. It's to not take on a rent you can't afford, to buy a car you can't afford, to put all your money on credit cards and then require you to keep that job and stay in that relationship, or you lose all those things that you've grown accustomed to, that lifestyle creep, right? And, when I think back, I used to wait tables in college, and I can't tell you the amount of times I said, fuck you, I'm out, and just left that job in the middle of a shift. I couldn't imagine doing that today, but I did that because, my bills were so low. I had one rent. I had my car was used. I had it paid off. All I had to pay was rent and maybe my cable bill. I could go without a cable for a month or two. And I could just walk in any restaurant and pick up a job again, pretty much. And so I feel like this is kind of one of those things The difference in that analogy, I feel like, is most of us are tied to that relationship and cannot leave, or we lose all of those things that we have. I think a lot of us, we fall into the lifestyle creep, especially in tech, where I know people, for instance, that are making $500,000 after their full comp package working at a FANG company. That is insane. Like, if you get used to a $500,000 a year comp package and you lose that job, your options are so limited. Or if you get into a place where you're like, fuck this job, I want to quit, unless you want to give up the BMW and the fancy high-rise apartment and all the like steak dinners every night, whatever it is you want to do, right? You're tied to that job unless you're willing to give those other things up too. And I think that's agency that a lot of us are not even thinking about, is like, how do I make it so that I can get out of this relationship?
Ooh, there's a lot I want to say. I think in terms of, here, I'll say a couple things. One is, I think this conversation actually veers a little bit more into a conversation around security. And I actually shared a LinkedIn post about this a week or so ago, where I was basically talking about how, contrary to what our employers want us to believe, security isn't something you're given, which is what you're describing right now. Like, this is, the $500,000 comp, that you don't need a year, for being honest. All these things, the Bugatti, whatever it is. But our employer wants us to believe that security is something that we're given. These systems that we're in want us to believe that. But the shift is understanding that security is something you build. That stable job disappears the moment the company restructures. That safe paycheck, it's only safe until leadership changes direction. That dependable career path, it depends entirely on someone else's approval. So like, even this like job, is a false sense of security. I remember when I was working in corporate, I was working at Salesforce and building Humanity Centered, my first consulting business. And I remember talking to a good friend of mine. I was like, I want to leave corporate and just kind of like do my own thing, but I have this good job, this stable paycheck, had a really good reputation in Salesforce, texting, FaceTiming basis with some of our C-level executives. And I was like, I'd be leaving that for risk, whether that is starting my own business and building that, which was the path I wanted to do. Or for some of you who are listening to this, the risk is to go out and find a different job in the marketplace. And she was like, and I was like, I'd be leaving this secure thing for something unknown. And I got bills to pay. And she's like, yeah, but that's a false sense of security, because they could lay you off tomorrow and not think twice about it. And so I think there's this mindset shift that I had to like kind of slip into. And part of that was stepping out of this limiting belief around security, realizing that when I step into greater ownership of my career, my business, my creativity, my earning potential, even the way I take care of myself, security takes on a completely different meaning, because now security becomes about capacity to pivot, capacity to be creative in how you're thinking about your career. Some of y'all are so worried about your 500 comp package that you see that as like the security, but you actually have then no capacity to think about life outside of it and how to actually enjoy this short time we have on this side of forever. So you have no capacity to think about something else, how you might create something for yourself on your own terms, whether that's within a different org or company, or even like your own business. And so now when you have that shift, security stops being passive, which that's, I think, a lot of people's relationship to security. It's super passive. So of course it's easier to just default to, well, I just need to stay with my abuser because I got bills to pay. Whereas if I actually wanted to be proactive and I had capacity to do that, now security, it's intentional, it's strategic, it's something that I'm building over time, because once you understand that security is something you build, you stop waiting for permission and you start designing a life and career that actually supports you and works for you and allows you to feel and be more free.
Yeah. See, I want to highlight one thing you just said, and I think this is like so important. And I feel like a lot of people in those really high paying tech jobs making 500 grand, putting up with the crying at the end of every single day because they're so stressed out. Their mental model is, I'm going to suffer through this now. I'm going to retire early, right? I'm going to retire when I'm 35. I've heard a lot of people talk about that. I'm going to retire before I'm 40. But one thing you just mentioned, like limited time on earth, you have no idea when your time is up. And like, it could be next week. It could be this afternoon. It could be 5 minutes from now. You have suffered and suffered and suffered for the sake of this future security, and you might not ever actually enjoy it and like just live life live it now and enjoy it now, because you have no idea when it ends, and suffering for the sake of the future security, you just never, ever, ever know. And I just think that's like such a important, just philosophical thing to point out there. This last thing leads me to something I want to talk about more of, is this idea of entrepreneurship. And you've said this, designers, we researchers, we make the best entrepreneurs, and but we're scared. We're scared to take that jump. So you, Dan Mall, Rachel Dekas, you guys have something coming up. And I think this like ties in. And, we're not here, again, this is not meant to be an infomercial for what you've got going on, but I think it is so important. I just want to bring it up and I want to talk about it. Full disclosure, no one's paying me to talk about this, but I want to talk about this a little bit and how we can apply some of these things we've talked about vis-a-vis what you guys are doing, and how we can get some of that agency back by maybe not going 100% open my own shop, fuck you, job, I'm out, quitting, and the next day starting the thing. I think it's like, we think of that as like a binary either or, but I think there's a blend where you could, take some entrepreneur, do some experiments like you suggest. Talk a little bit about the Walkout and what you guys are doing and how we can apply some of these things we've talked about via what you guys got going on.
Yeah. So myself, Dan Mall, and Rachel Dekas, we are hosting a 2-day experience in January called the Walkout. And the Walkout is specifically for UX professionals who are interested in building a life and career outside of corporate without a lot of the things that I think keep people stuck in it: regret, guilt, or even just fear around starting from scratch. So we're doing a 2-day event, and you'll be hearing from 3 UX folks who built a career path outside of corporate design. And you'll also be with a bunch of other folks in UX who are curious and who believe that there has to be more to life than enduring the corporate grind. And so we have a few talks in store. We'll do an unfiltered live Q&A. And then we have day 2, we have some different workshops you can opt into. And for me, again, I'm always thinking about how can we design businesses and experiences that challenge the status quo? So for us, like, we don't want to engage in the typical capitalistic scarcity tactics, early bird, normal, last minute ticket sales. It's one low cost. We're donating 20% to 2 nonprofits that are close and dear to my heart, who are doing amazing work in these wild times that we're in. And we're really just trying to think about, hey, how do we help people feel less alone and feeling stuck, and helping them to start to think about what could be next and how they can make those steps.
I love it. Yeah. So it's the walkout.com. What's the URL?
Join the Walkout.
Join the Walkout. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Jointhewalkout.com to learn more, save your seat. And we're super excited.
No, I love that. So, and again, tying a lot of that stuff back to what we talked about, I feel like this is such an important thing. Like, I've got 1,000 little side hustles. Like, none of them make me a ton of money. Books and conference talks and podcasts. And my wife and I started like a Cub Scout custom t-shirt shop on Etsy. And, but one of the things that I think about, and I have a background in economics. I actually went to college for economics, dropped out. I realized the sunk cost fallacy was real. And so I left, but don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I think so many of us, when we talk about agency, we give it up. We give it up when we just rely on one job for a sole source of income for everything. And we just give all of that to someone and they could cut us at any minute. And I feel like, just for me, when hearing you talk and a lot of stuff you're talking about with like entrepreneurship, it doesn't have to be your full-time job. But if you could, a little bit here, a little bit there, make a few thousand here, a few thousand there, when you do lose a job, the stress just is not, it's high, obviously, but it's not nearly as high when you have zero income and you can make things work. You could sell your house maybe, or sell your car. Your kids aren't going to starve. You've at least got something. I think a lot about Dr. Ari Zalmanal. I don't know if you know him from LinkedIn, but got laid off and he started laid off to add kettle corn. So he's doing kettle corn now. We were talking and I ordered some. It's fantastic kettle corn, but it's one of those things where he just tried the corporate life. It didn't work out. And now he's doing his own thing and selling kettle corn. It's completely different, but still kind of taking UX research principles and understanding customers and stuff. So it's just because you leave UX, I think this is an important thing. You mentioned this before. Just because you leave software doesn't mean those UX principles can't be applied to anything you do in the future. I think that's such an important takeaway for people who are interested in going the entrepreneur route is, just because you leave UX or start doing other things doesn't mean all that stuff you learned is invalid. It's still more valid, probably more than ever now. So I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, but I love that what you're doing, and I love that idea, and I love that you guys are helping people figure this out.
Yeah, for me, I have a very deep belief that entrepreneurship can and should be a healing experience. I think it's possible to build something for yourself that's values aligned and that's profitable and doesn't need to use a capitalism bros blueprint. And so for me, going a little bit back to an earlier conversation we were having about life is short and kind of just being recognized that we aren't promised tomorrow. I know for me, like, I remember having this moment where I was like, I don't think this is it. And I kind of want to explore building something for myself. At the time, I was on short term leave. I was taking about 2.5 months off because had reached this point in corporate where I felt like I was losing myself. And I felt disconnected to who I was when I entered the industry from who I was at that moment. And I remember just kind of being this place of like, I think I need to like better myself and kind of see what's possible. And I started that night, I watched the movie Judas and the Black Messiah. Have you seen that
Oh
movie?
yeah, I have not. No, you
It's
mentioned
so
it
good.
last time we talked, but I haven't seen it. Yeah.
Okay. So Judas and the Black Messiah, amazing movie based on a true story about the leader of the Black Panthers in Chicago and how I believe it was the CIA and the Chicago police worked together to assassinate him because he was like bringing together like the poor Puerto Ricans, the poor whites, and he was, advocating for justice and all these things. Anyways, there's this scene in the beginning of the movie where there's a bunch of Black Chicagoans and they're super excited that they're going to be naming a community college after Malcolm X. And Fred Hampton, the main character, he gets up and he's like, yeah, that's cool. That's cool. You think that's going to make you free? And I just had this moment right then and there where I was like, yo, I'm not free. We're going to give you this little raise. You think that's going to make you free? We're going to give you this little employee resource group. You think that's going to make you free? We're going to give you this new job title. You think that's going to make you free? And I was like, I am not free. And I had to kind of go back to, and this was in the midst of 2020, right? And I was like, in light of everything that I'm seeing and witnessing right now, life is really short. And I don't want to get to when I'm 70, 80 years old and look back and be like, why didn't I even like try? I think one of the ways to overcome fear is by acting in the midst of it. And so when I think about entrepreneurship, and for me, it's been such a healing experience. I had someone ask me, they're like, how do you know you've been healing from corporate America? And I'm just like, I really noticed three things. One is that I'm less afraid. Like, I don't think I realized how afraid I was. People see me as someone who's not, but I feel like, man, I was so afraid when I was in corporate. And I was like, and now like I'm less afraid. And because I'm less afraid, I'm trusting my gut more. I'm not having to contort myself or second guess myself all the time in these corporate situations and settings. And because I'm less afraid, I'm trusting my gut more. I'm more creative. Like I'm meeting parts of myself for like the first time. And she's super dope. And I'm really enjoying like the life and the things that I'm building with her. And it's just made me more excited and curious and optimistic about what could be instead of thinking about how can I just continue to endure. And that's the difference between, I think, how do you contribute more than you complain? If you're kind of in this cycle of like, let me just complain about how things are, but yet you're not contributing to how things can be different. Like this could be that moment, right? Of even just getting curious and seeing what could be possible. You don't have to go, all in and leave your job and all these things, but at least get curious. I know curiosity and creativity, I feel like it's something corporate tends to suck away from us. So why not take it back from them?
I love it. So I've got a few questions I want to ask you in a minute, but before we do that, I just want to one more time I want to reiterate that like what I love about what you guys are doing is all the fear, everything you just talked about. It's so much easier to do things when you've got a community and when you've got a group and when you've got someone coaching you and someone helping you get through it than just doing it on your own. And so I just want to close out the conversation before we move on to those questions by saying like, going to your conference and getting the help and the resources there make that jump so much less scary. And I think it alleviates a lot of the fear. And if you're listening and you feel stuck and you hate your abusive partner, if you will, but you feel like you're stuck, this is a really great opportunity, I think, to have somebody help you and you don't have to do it alone and you have those resources. So Anyway, thank you for doing that. I love that you guys are doing that. I'm really excited. I'm happy to share and hopefully get some people out there signed up with your conference. So, all right, cool. So like I said, I got a few questions I'd like to ask all of my guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. We've had you for a while. This has been a really long interview, but I think it's great, by the way. But do you have some time to stick around? I don't want to keep you.
I do.
This is a great thing about working for yourself. You're like, fucking meeting. It's my meeting.
Yeah.
Who's going to, I love that. Yeah, you're not tied to like your corporate Zoom calls or whatever. All right. So these are 5 simple questions. First thing that comes to your mind. You don't have to think too hard about it. First up, what is your favorite non-design book?
Ooh, my favorite non-design book. It's The Creative Act. Does that count? By Rick Rubin?
Yeah, it counts. He's not a designer technically, I guess.
Yeah. I think what I love about the book is it just really gets to the core of like, yo, how do you be creative again and honor that within yourself? And I read it at least once or twice a year.
I love that. And if we're thinking about being contrarian, but still being successful, like I think about, people like Rick Rubin, where like, I remember an interview recently where like some artist he was producing, he's like, yeah, play it this way. And they're like, no, fuck no, that's insane. Was it Johnny Cash, maybe like the Cash album?
Yeah.
And anyway, but it was like, no, I'm not doing that. You're insane. It was like one of his biggest hits like ever.
Yes.
Anyway, but I think about that. I think about like kind of reframing it and taking your agency back. But anyway, yeah, it's on my list. I've never read it, but I guess now, why not?
Yes. I would say The Creative Act by Rick Rubin or The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. More of a stoicism take in terms of when you are in the midst of a hardship and chaos, like how do you still flourish in the midst of it? And I love it.
Ooh, I love that. It's pertinent for this topic today as well. I love that. All right, next up, what is your favorite non-design podcast?
Probably one that I listen to the most is The Game with Alex Hormozy. He talks a lot about entrepreneurship and business. Now, footnote, he can be very bro-y at times, but I just learned to focus on the nuggets of gold and ignore the rest.
I love that. Yeah. It's hard to get, especially like some of those like entrepreneur podcasts. It's hard to get away from like tech bros and stuff,
Yeah. But he's actually like practical and like very like good at business. So like I really enjoy his stuff. Minus the few moments here and there.
Hell yeah. All right. Next up, what is your favorite vacation spot?
Favorite vacation spot? It would have to be, it's not like a regular vacation spot, but one of my favorite places I've gone to, was Lima, Peru. Like the food there was
Oh yeah. I love
amazing.
There's a Peruvian chicken place in DC that I went to once. It was like roasted chickens and all that stuff, like with the potatoes and I can't remember where it was, but it was like one of the best meals I've ever had.
Yeah.
I've never been to Lima, Peru. I've never been to Peru at all, but it was on our list of like when we got married, a honeymoon was to like hike up to Machu Picchu and do all that stuff and then do the Galapagos Islands. And then it was like so expensive we couldn't afford it. So we didn't do that. But anyway, it's still like on my bucket list to head up there. And how was the altitude? Did you being from Chicago, like, sea level?
Yeah.
Do you have any struggle with that?
It was a little adjustment the first couple days, but then it was fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It wasn't so bad. I guess. Yeah. So we're from New Orleans, so we're like 5 feet below Chicago, as far as sea level goes. But we were joking about how we like would die because we didn't have any oxygen because our New Orleans bodies couldn't handle it. All right. Last question. What is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
Favorite design tool that's not Figma? Honestly, like my first gut answer was like my brain, just like being able to like think for myself. Yeah. Sorry. There's no like techie tools that I have in mind, but it's really just like curiosity is probably like one of my favorite tools.
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah. Your brain, the ultimate design tool. I love that.
Yeah. Like I don't read books and like things like when I was working in UX, I didn't really care for design or UX books or tools. Like I was reading about things related to like stoicism, persuasion, negotiation, organizational psychology, like trauma of money. Like that's kind of like where I'm thinking more about the context and things around the design versus like the tool itself. So yeah.
I love that. All right. Awesome. So Vivian, this has been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate you coming on. Before we get out of here, tell everybody one more time where they can find you and all the stuff you got going on and join the Walkout and all that stuff if they want.
Absolutely. You can learn a little bit more about what I'm up to around supporting UX folks who are wanting to explore entrepreneurship, build their own thing at choosecourageinc.com. And then you can also join the Walkout, join myself, Dan Mall, Rachel Dekas in January at jointhewalkout.com.
All right. And what are the dates?
The dates are January 15th and 16th.
Right on. And is it in person or remote?
It's remote.
Remote. Perfect. All right. So you got no excuses out there. If you feel stuck, please check out everything Vivian's got going on. Vivian, once again, thank you so much for coming on Beyond UX Design. I'm so excited and honored to have you on. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you.
Well, all right, y'all. That's it for Vivian and me for today. I hope we helped you to think about how corporate design culture can quietly reward your burnout and why that endurance often will get mistaken for professionalism, but don't let it. Have you reclaimed your creativity or your agency in your choice? How'd you do it? If so, I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what you think on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I'd love to hear from you. And if you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you know. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, then why don't you tell them about it? That would be fantastic. If you listened all the way until now, then you've definitely earned a merit-ish badge. Whether you survive tricky team dynamics, Figma fiascos, or pixel-perfect feedback loops, there's a badge with your name on it. Grab 2 sets for $20 at beyonduxdesign.com/badges. Just promise me one thing. Send pics and show me where you stick them. Help keep the show independent and ad-free. Check out beyonduxdesign.com/support to find out how. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, Tino, Adina, Zoe, and many others, and help keep the show independent and ad-free. You'll get exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. Get instant access to those videos right now for as little as $5 a month. And if you're tired of staring at a blank Figma canvas, Mobbin gives you access to over 400,000 beautifully designed UI screens and user flows with a library that grows bigger every week. Kickstart your creativity, streamline your workflow, and level up your design process. Visit mobbin.com/beyondux to get 20% off Mobbin Pro and never run out of inspiration again. Remember to sign up for the newsletter and check out all the past episodes along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX and design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all. And maybe realize that we have more choices than we might have recognized. I don't like that. Wait, well, oh shit. Oh, that's the other thing. Retakes. You could do retakes if you and curse too. I didn't mention that, but
okay,
anyway,
cool.
Yeah, okay. Oh my God, I can't talk today. I'm sorry.